Every time I have a bowl of clam chowder, it brings me back to when I'd walk around the pier in San Francisco and I'd grab a sourdough bread bowl filled with clam chowder, and it was just the best thing ever because San Francisco is typically cold, and then that bowl of soup was just nice and warm. And given that it's cold here, I thought it would be perfect time to make a bowl of clam chowder. Let me show you how to make it. Since this is clam chowder, let's talk about the clams first. I am using 3 pounds of Manila clams, and all I'm going to do is go through them to check to make sure that there are none dead, meaning none of them should be open. And if there are some that are slightly open, just give it a tiny squeeze and they should close. And if they don't, that means they are dead, so you should throw them out. So my clams have been soaking in this salty cold water in the fridge for about 2 hours, and it looks pretty clean, so I'm not going to re-soak them. But if yours does look dirty still after 2 hours, go ahead and dump that water and refill it with salty cold water, and then let it soak for another hour, or you keep repeating this until it is clear. But once it is not dirty anymore, go ahead and strain it, and then let's cook these. To do that, I'm gonna dump my clams in a pot on medium-high heat, and into this pot I'm gonna go in with a cup of wine and some water. The exact measurements will be in the description box below, so check there. Since the clams will be already slightly salty, I'm just going to go in with a small pinch of salt. And now I'm going to let it come up to a boil and cook it for about 10 to 15 minutes. Also, putting on a lid will help it cook faster. For the first of my vegetables, I will be using 1 leek and just the light green and white part. And leeks tend to be pretty muddy in between its layers, so just go ahead and cut it in half and give it a rinse. And once it looks clean like this, I'm gonna go ahead and just thinly slice them. Also, a quick note, these are the vegetables that I chose to go with. You can always add other vegetables like carrots and or celery or whatever else. Now I'm gonna go ahead and medium dice a large onion. And then I'm also going to mince up some garlic. A round of fine mince will be good. Last but definitely not least, I'm going to use some Yukon Gold potatoes. All I'm going to do here is cut them into about 1/2 inch cubes. So just cut the potato into 1/2 inch thick planks, and then take each of those planks and slice it down into 1/2 inch thick strips. And then you guessed it, take those strips and cut it into 1/2 inch cubes. Now this is totally optional, but I love adding bacon to my clam chowder. I love the smokiness that it gives me. So I'm going to use about 3 strips of bacon, and I'm just going to cut that down into bite-sized pieces. For me, about 10 minutes later, my clams are perfectly cooked. How do you know they're cooked? Well, once the clams are opened up, something like this, that means they are cooked. So go ahead and shut off the heat, and then go ahead and strain this into a bowl, because we want to save that clam stock for the clam chowder in a bit. So don't throw away any of that stock. Once it's all strained out, return your pot to a medium to high heat, and then go ahead and start rendering the fat out of your bacon. You're going to cook it until it gets nice and crispy and browned. And I do want to render out as much fat as I can, because I'm going to use that fat to fry up my leeks and my onions and my garlic later, because that's where the bacon flavor will come from. So once the bacon starts to look brown like this, go ahead and take it out and put it on a bowl lined with paper towel to soak up the excess fat. As for the fat left in the pot, go ahead and just dump out the fat into a bowl and just save about 2 tablespoons worth in the pot. And to that same pot with the bacon fat, add in your onions and the leek, and go in with a pinch of salt. And then now you're just going to go ahead and cook this down until they get nice and soft and they start to take on a little bit of color. This will allow them to get nice and sweet and add a little bit of earthiness to the clam chowder. Since my mixture is looking a little bit dry, I'm going to add in 3 tablespoons of that bacon fat we saved on the side. If you have enough fat, about 2 to 3 tablespoons, then you don't have to add any more. But to that, I'm going to go ahead and add 2.5 tablespoons of my flour. And then I'm just going to cook that until the flour gets nice and toasted, and then it starts getting stuck to the bottom. That's how I know the flour is getting cooked out. And once it kind of looks like this, now add in the clam stock from earlier. You remember that clam stock, right? So just add in a cup of your clam stock and stir it and scrape the bottom. Make sure all the flour is getting absorbed into this liquid, or I should say the liquid is getting absorbed by the flour. And once it gets nice and thick, go ahead and add in another cup of your stock. Again, same procedure, keep stirring, make sure there's no lumps, and make sure that the liquid is all absorbed by the roux. And it gets nice and thick, and then go ahead and add your stock and repeat until you finish up what's left of your stock. We're going about 4 cups worth. It might look a little thin now, but that's okay because it will thicken up when we cook the potatoes. Depending on how salty your clam stock was, you might want to add a pinch of salt. But I would definitely aim to under season because this soup will cook down a little bit more as we cook the potatoes. And speaking of which, now go in with the potatoes and then just give it a quick stir to make sure it's fully submerged. And then cook your potatoes on medium-high heat for about 10 to 15 minutes or until tender, but not falling apart. But throughout the cooking process of the potatoes, I'm going to go ahead and go in and just give it a stir every once in a while to make sure that none of the potatoes sticking to the bottom of the pot and to make sure that nothing is burning at the bottom of the pot. But after about 10 minutes, my potatoes are cooked. Yours might take longer. And the way you know if it's cooked or not, you can take a fork or a knife and just pierce the potato. And if it pierces easily, then it's cooked. And once it is cooked, go ahead and go in with some cream. Again, measurements will be in the description box below. And then just stir this up. Now, before I go in with the clams, I'm going to give it one last taste test and make sure that the salt levels are perfect to my liking. And once it is, I'm going to go in with the clam meat picked from half of the clams. You don't actually have to pick the meat off of the clams, but I quite like having a mixture of just clam meat and meat on the shells. Speaking of which, I put in the other half of the untouched clams. And then now all I'm going to do is stir this up, make sure the clam meat is evenly distributed into the soup. And now I'm going to get this plated up in a bowl. Or should I say bowled up in a bowl. Now after that has been put in a bowl, I'm going to go ahead and garnish with some scallions. If you don't have scallions, you can use chives, you can use parsley, whatever herbs you have on hand. And for the last touch, I'm going to go in with a generous amount of fresh cracked pepper. And now it's time for the taste test. Ooh, I'm excited to try this right now. So before I dig into it, I just want to say a few things. If you don't want to use fresh clams, you don't have to actually. I've done this with canned clams and just getting some clam juice. It's totally delicious. But using the fresh clams is a step up, so I recommend you trying it. So with that said, let's try this. Oh, one more thing. I forgot to top this with bacon earlier, so just a little sprinkle of bacon on the bowl. Now let's try it for reals. Okay, so I got a bite. All right. Cheers. All right. This is so good. Making the clam broth from scratch like we did earlier, it adds a nice brininess to this whole dish. You can taste the brininess of the clams. And then speaking of the clam, the meat is very nice and sweet, and it has an oceany taste in a good way, like the same way seaweed would have, or any other seafood really. And then the broth, cooked with the onions and then the leeks, it gives it a nice earthiness, a nice sweetness as well. And I only put a touch of cream, so it's not heavy and it's not too fatty. And yeah, the potatoes are cooked to perfection. They're nice and tender, but they're not falling apart, so they're not mushy. And having that bacon sprinkled right on top, it's just a nice bite of saltiness to cut through everything. So give this recipe a try. If you like the video, hit the like button below. For more videos like this, go ahead and hit the subscribe button or that one right there. And for my previous video, go ahead and hit that one right there. And I'll catch you on the next one. Thank you. Bye.